Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today we have a special episode. We have Sarah and Robert Bednarz, both emeritus professors from Texas A&M University. Thank you both for joining us.
You're welcome.
You know, this is really a unique episode, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about this because you're one of the handful of married couples that have played a critical role in the development of academic geography in the United States, and I'm hoping you can lend some insight because I believe it's becoming an increasingly more popular, we'll say, phenomenon, if you will. You know, so early on, you were challenged, I'm sure, by one of you having a different role than the other. Would you care to comment on some of the early challenges, maybe early in your marriage in Chicago, going to Evanston?
Well, actually, it was. It's actually been fairly easy, I think. I understood from the beginning that there were going to have to be compromises. Mm-hmm. And as I said before, when we were talking earlier, I loved teaching and I loved being in schools with students, and so that was never a sacrifice for me. In terms of, like, I felt belittled by having to do that rather than have a university career or anything of that nature.
So you considered your teaching a privilege in many ways, doing what you were doing.
That's a nice way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Bob?
And Sarah, being a teacher, was mobile. So we kind of figured out that I was less mobile, being a university person. There were, fewer opportunities that fit my expertise and background. And so I think we sort of figured out right away that if I found a job, that would determine where we had to go, because Sarah could get a job almost anywhere and I couldn't.
Mm-hmm. And when you were at home, did you engage in dialogue about some of the challenges you faced in your department at Northwestern, Bob, or at St. Mary's of the Last Resort,
Yes, Bob was. Remember, I told you earlier that Bob had actually taught at the lab school, the same class that I had as my student teachers. And so, Bob and I have always been partners in terms of talking about teaching and learning and geography. And that is both professional and personal. We used to play a game when we'd go camping in the summers, like, where in town are we going to find the cheapest gasoline? And we would apply like all of our urban geography concepts to, it's not going to be right off the interstate, but it's not going to be, so it's like a lifelong, it's an avocation.
Did it work? Did it work most of the time?
Yeah. Pretty much.
Well, so you engaged in this dialogue with each other, and you mentioned a very important word, and that is partnership. You've had this really special partnership, and it reminds me of another couple I know in Africa that is involved in a business, and they have found themselves challenged at times with regard to their business. But one thing that struck me was they would come up with some disagreements on occasion, and instead of going into a heated argument, they would check each other and say, "Oh, hold it. We're on the same team. You're on my team, I'm on your team." And being partners, being on the same team was very important to them.
Yes, we're on the same team, but you raised the issue in our previous comments about couples in geography departments or in faculty positions, not only in geography. And I am wary of, I've seen examples where you had a husband and a wife in the same department or in the same kind of academic setting, where they were very much one unit, one block, one vote. And that concerns me because Bob and I have never necessarily been one block, one opinion, one.
No, on many occasions, we disagreed about something that came up as a departmental policy or program or something like that. And even on personnel decisions, we would sometimes disagree. One be in favor of hiring somebody and the other not. So I don't know how our colleagues really thought of us. I never got any indication that they were unhappy with the way we behaved. But at least from my perspective, I felt that we both gave honest, independent opinions or advice.
You mentioned something very important, which is that single double vote, really, of married couples in the same department. And that is a matter of concern in some places. What would you suggest to consider when a department, when considering hiring married couples to prevent that kind of double vote from happening?
Wow, that's tough. You just have to look at the personalities of the people involved, and understand that some couples are going to be a single unit, like they're in it as a unit, and not as two separate scholars with different interests and different areas of concern. That's all I can say. But you have to be careful because you don't want to discourage a department from hiring a spouse.
Certainly not.
Well, and it varies so much from place to place. For example, just in our careers, just in Texas, there were people who were on the faculty in Austin, and for spouse, if your spouse got a faculty position at University of Texas, there were plenty of other opportunities in the metropolitan area. For a long time, it may be less true today because there's been a lot of growth, but certainly in my early career, first half of career, faculty at A&M often faced a difficulty because it was a fairly small town and there wasn't a lot for a educated professional person to do if it wasn't somehow related to the university or affiliated with the university department, position, program, something like that. So it varies a lot from place to place and on what people really can do. They're sometimes stuck. And now, of course, as you were sort of implying, there's partner placement programs are pretty common around the country. Sarah really did get her job on her own. There wasn't any placement when she came in as a visiting assistant professor to begin with, and then when a position opened up and she applied. And of course I was totally out of that whole thing. I mean, I didn't go to any meetings or anything like that.
No, you would have to recuse yourself of all meetings concerning spousal hire, I would think.
Right.
But it's a matter of ethics, and actually that's something AAG could probably develop is some kind of a document about faculty ethics in terms of these kinds of hiring and promotion kinds of policies, because I certainly know colleagues who have behaved in unethical ways in terms of promoting a partner.
That's a very profound bit of advice, and I think we should have it presented to the council in the near future, because as these hires are becoming increasingly more important, we will have to address them. And yes, this matter of ethics is very important, not only in the academy, but also in the AAG. I mean, you've both been active in the AAG. Would you care to comment on any kinds of challenges that has brought to your attention?
Well, I would let Sarah comment, because she certainly was much more involved at a more management level. I chaired the specialty committee and things like that, but I was never a council member or an elected officer. And we, I guess in NCGE, we were never officers or anything at the same time.
No. But I'll tell you one funny, to me it's funny anecdote. The year Bob was president of National Council for Geographic Education, they held the meeting on the campus of University of British Columbia. And so his presidential suite was a dorm room.
And Sarah has never let me forget it. I'll tell you that.
And of course, when I was president of AAG, I had a lovely 2-story suite in San Francisco, but that compensated for the dorm room that he got as president.
So he was allowed to go to the presidential suite in San Francisco, I guess.
He did get to stay with me, yes. Yeah.
Well, thankfully, And
in geography, there have been a number of couples I can think of who were older than we were, who were married and who kind of served as role models in a way. I mean, you can be a successful career, you can have a successful career in geography. And certainly Susan Hansen and Perry Hansen were role models, and Bob was in graduate school with them at Northwestern when he got his master's at Northwestern. And just so to have these kinds of examples of people who were successful at 2 careers in geography, Risa Palm and her husband,
David Greenland. Mm-hmm.
Yep. There are lots of them that were served as good examples, and were Mona Dimash and Frank Mulligan. Mm-hmm. So, but that's later that we've known that. But earlier, yeah. So, there's a rich history. I think it's because to see the world as geographers do is kind of unique, and you find each other because you share that kind of unique perspective. So.
Well, and geography is a small world. There were departments on the campus that were larger than our whole college, and so I think if there are 2 geographers, there just aren't that many opportunities. It's more likely you're going to end up in the same place.
Well, and I think we have to recognize that times have changed considerably. In the last century, well, let's just say you mentioned Risa Palm, for example. She was only the 2nd female president after Ellen Churchill Semple, which was, I think, 70 years or so after Ellen Churchill Semple was elected, okay? And then in the current century, the majority of AAG presidents have been female. Right.
Yeah,
and so I think there is now a recognition that there is parity, and that women are very important in the geographic discipline. Not that they haven't been in the past, but there's a recognition today. There has to be,
Yeah.
And that's what makes these kinds of relationships and in different departments or in our organization, something really to ponder, Can you imagine any conflicts that might occur in an organization like a department or the AAG where which a married couple might present, aside from that single block voting?
That's a tough question.
Well, you could imagine a situation where one person was promoted and the other not, or one person got tenure and the other did not. I could imagine that might make even the successful person bitter about. And in fact, I seem to recall a situation like that, although I can't bring it up to my memory right now.
Well, we had a wonderful colleague at Texas A&M, and I won't mention the name, but because his wife was not invited into the to teach, or the department head at the time just didn't go out of his way to help get her career launched, and he ended up leaving for another institution because of that. So it's that whole idea of if both of you cannot be successfully situated in a context that is meaningful and productive, then that will cause movement.
It's interesting. In certain institutions, one spouse cannot have authority over another spouse administratively. So if there is a spousal hire, one cannot be a department chair, for example. Have you seen instances of where this has occurred?
Oh yeah, lots. In the College of Geosciences at A&M, I mean, it's kind of a hyperbole, but literally everybody was married to somebody else on the faculty. And so when one person became dean, then that I'm thinking of an example of an oceanographer, and then her husband was then, I guess he had to report to another entity because she was the dean, right. And so so at most institutions there are kind of technical fixes for this, but that doesn't necessarily again address the ethical issues of raises and opportunities for spouses one way or another. So
well, and I think this matter of ethics is still very important for us to pursue. And again, the AAG should really weigh in on this. Do you have any particular suggestions, given your experiences? Aside from recusal from committees and... we have the JEDI group, which is looking at diversity and inclusion. And certainly if you're talking about inclusion, including ethically would be, I think that would be something that they would want to address and deal with. Mm-hmm. Anything else that you could think of? Any other aspects aside from recusal from committees and one spouse having authority over the other, potentially?
Well, it's even worse than that. Sometimes you can have people who are literally campaigning in the department for certain things that are going to benefit them and nobody else. And it's hard to counteract that kind of bad behavior, I think.
Yeah, I think you're really stuck with depending on individuals to, it's a little trite to say it, but to do the right thing. And or perhaps to have leadership who is willing to take on these sticky problems. Mm-hmm. And of course, I think probably all of us have worked under people who were effective, fair, and honest leaders, and others who either avoided problems or didn't act ethically. And I mean,
to say they
certainly
were questionable.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that if you were the department head, you should really celebrate any faculty member's accomplishment in any way, because here was a person in your unit bringing some positive feeling, response, impact on your unit, and you should be proud of that. But I certainly have worked for people who almost seemed jealous of the faculty members, and I never understood why you'd want to behave that way. But anyway.
I have seen exactly what you're talking about, and it's a tragedy, really, and it does not enable the discipline to prosper, not at all. But from what you're saying, it seems to me that the most important thing to consider is to engage in a really careful hiring process, to really screen your applicants.
Yeah.
And how do you engage in that screening and analysis beyond what might be permitted by law?
You can't.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's almost impossible to work those things out ahead of time, because you can't really ask much about about what you'd really like to know about. And certainly I'm aware of situations in which information was purposely withheld until the hire, was official. It was too late when the information at that point was irrelevant. But there wasn't much that could have been done ahead of time because of the constraints on asking certain questions about certain things.
Which is not good, especially for a discipline such as ours. And hiring is so very important. Hiring the right person who will be part of the team, be part of the department, really pull their weight and contribute in an unselfish manner. It's so very important, yet oftentimes we don't engage in our screening very well, and we don't engage in that very important relationship building very well beforehand.
Yes, and I totally agree with you, but we are all showing our age in that we think of a department as a team, all working toward the same goal, whereas many of our younger colleagues, I think, have a very different approach to their careers. It's about them and their own career, and not the good of no shared sense of commonality or common good.
Yeah, I think some people take a kind of consultant approach, like the university is giving me a place to sit and a title and the opportunity to do what I need to do to get myself ahead.
Do you think that it's becoming increasingly the norm? And I'll say this as I reflect upon some words that Carl Sauer said in the 50s, and that was something like, I came to Berkeley to build the university and the Department of Geography, and others have come here to build themselves.
Yeah. Well, I would certainly
That's not
agree.
verbatim, but it's very close to what he said.
Yeah.
One of the best department heads that we had at Texas A&M was this character by the name of Campbell W. Pennington. I don't know if you ever knew Campbell Pennington. But
He had just come from SIU to go to A&M. Yeah.
there you go. So you do know him. Well, he was at Berkeley with Sauer. And he worked so hard to build the Department of Geography and to build a cohesive unit of people who liked each other. And he did a great job. And we had one curmudgeonly person on the faculty. No, I wasn't on the faculty at the time, but of course I was spending a lot of time there. And Campbell would very carefully isolate him so that his negativity didn't spill out all over everything. It did occasionally.
Well, and as I was saying earlier, he was willing to take on these problems. He didn't shy away from it, and when it was necessary to do something that was unpleasant, he did. And what I always said about Campbell is I never thought that he made a decision to put himself ahead of the department. He was always willing to step back and put the department first, even in financial situations sometimes.
I've heard that about him as well. I think Dan Ariola also commented to me about Campbell Pennington in very favorable terms as an academic leader. He was stellar. That's for sure.
And there's another geography couple, Susan Ariola and Dan Ariola, both geographers.
Well, it must be A&M, huh?
Well, or it could just be New Mexico now, because
Yeah, it is. They live very close to you, don't they?
And we travel with them sometimes. So.
That's wonderful.
Or geographers.
And trying to figure out where to get the cheapest gas.
Right.
I'm going to ask you to think about leadership and leadership qualities, because you've each played various roles. Sarah, you, and in a formal sense, as president of the AAG, and Bob, informally in many ways, behind the scenes, serving as a leader, mentoring and doing a number of things, also in editorships and things of that nature. Would you comment on 2 or 3 qualities that you think are very important for academic leaders, both informal and formal leaders? What are 2 or 3 qualities that are musts, that are imperative?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I had the pleasure of being the faculty speaker-elect at Texas A&M when Bob
Gates
was president. Bob Gates went on to become Secretary of Defense and had been president of CIA, or leader of the CIA, director of the CIA. And at one point when he was interacting with the faculty and there was kind of a decision he wanted support from, he came to the Senate and he said, look, I'm coming to you to a certain extent to sort of ask for a favor. And he said, one thing I learned at the CIA was, I was director, but I had to get the personnel behind me because they were the people who were going to make it happen. And if they weren't behind my plans, it wasn't going to happen. And so I'm here to hear what you have to say, and with any luck, convince you that what I want to do is the right thing and you'll support me. So I think, if you want to be a leader, being a leader means getting people to voluntarily follow you. That's what a leader is. Somebody who others are happy to follow and take advice from and work together with. So to me, that's kind of the key.
That's
transparency, honesty, fearlessness.
Fearlessness in what context?
Well, not being afraid to take a stand, of being active, doing something, planning, and executing.
And I think just being careful, gathering information and data. One thing I learned with as an editor was, once in a great while, some author would be ticked off because their paper wasn't accepted, and if you kept a very careful record of the process, there's sort of, you didn't really have to defend anything. You could say, look, this is what we did. These are the people, not naming them necessarily, but these are the responses we got. It's my job to read those responses and make a decision. This is the decision I made. So, you can like it or not like it, but that's the way it is. So I think the other thing is, it kind of goes to transparency, but being careful, following a procedure, and keeping track of what you're doing, so that if there is a question, it's all very cut and dried. This is what we did, this is how we did it, and this is where we ended up.
And Bob, would you say that those attributes were ones that you embraced when you were leading the NCGE?
Yeah, I think so. The whole organization has changed a lot, but at that time, there was a strong committee structure, and a lot of the work was really done as it should be in the committees, and then brought to the general meeting for a final decision. And by encouraging them to follow that same path, to get the information that was needed, to circulate it, and then come to some recommendation until the decision was made. And I think I did the same thing as speaker. There was some people think I was unlucky, but I didn't mind it at all. Was there for a controversial change of presidents when the Board of Regents, in essence, forced one of the presidents out, our first female Latina president. And I said right up front to some of the faculty members wanted to, in my opinion, sort of fly off the handle and, write letters and, and I said, look, when this is all over, I want us to be the adults in the room. So we can say, we looked carefully at this problem, we thought about it, we came to these kinds of decisions, this is what we did, and this is where we stand. And I got pretty good response from the faculty. I didn't get much argument. People who initially wanted to do what I thought were unwise things didn't press and went along with the program.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's intriguing, and I think that those reflections are important. I'll ask you one last thing before we close for today, and that is this: we've looked at this matter of leadership, and we have various leaders in the American Association of Geographers at the regional level, in each regional division. We have an executive director, we have the executive council, and the officers of the association. It seems to me, Bob, what you brought up with regard to Gates's comment of seeking to get buy-in from everybody is very important. This seems to be a challenge in geography today, to get everybody to buy in to whatever mission we may seek to engage in with regard to the AAG. Do you have any ideas as to how this can be facilitated? How can this buy-in be facilitated by the leaders so that we can have a successful organization?
To me, I think it all rests with the executive director, because councils come and councils go, and people have various perspectives on different issues. But it's up to the executive director to kind of ameliorate and to keep long-term goals. I mean, we can't just have do this, do that, do this, do that. There has to be consistency. And I have to praise Gary. I think he's doing a really good job of keeping us on track while acknowledging some of the concerns of members, especially towards social justice kinds of issues. The whole idea of what is the future of annual meetings. And he's doing a really good job of doing exactly what Bob was talking about, is listening to people, trying to get opinions. But it really is up to the executive director to kind of keep the on an even keel.
I think choosing issues to address is also important. I mean, you can imagine there are things that the AAG might try to do that would be pretty divisive because big parts of the discipline would not agree. On the other hand, things that promote geography in general or strengthen the discipline ought to be able to gain support from a big majority of the membership. So I think choosing the right issues would also make sense.
And AAG Council's or Gary and his staff have been really good at saying, people will ask for letters of support from professional associations for any number of things. And they've been really good at keeping the number of letters that they write to a minimum, and only as these things directly affect the discipline of geography. So.
Well, those are, I think, very, very provocative words that I think should be adhered to as advice by not only the executive director, but the members too, to actually engage in sound followership, be willing to be solid followers. And
and to be willing to be a member of a group and know that your priorities are not necessarily everybody else's, and you're not going to steer the whole association down the road to exactly where you want to go. You know, you're part of a group, and you win some, you lose.
Well, and one of our principal missions, if not the principal mission, is to advance geography.
Right.
You know, and I'd like to thank you both, because our discipline has seen few, if any, greater champions, you know, than you two. Thank you for all you've done for the discipline, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. And this concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.